Beluche abstained by virtue of not attending the meeting. All right.
So, Chair, Newman, members of the Commission, before we move on the agenda, just want to add a recommendation. It's been a great, wonderful day, a lot of discussion. So I just want to throw out for the Chair and the Commission to consider if we would like to continue any of these items 4 through 6 to our meeting in September.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. I personally would recommend that we do defer on 4 and 5 with certainty. The workshop that I hope to accomplish won't take but 5 to 10 minutes if we're indulging to take care of that today. And then I think we could call it a day. So if that's all right with my colleagues, another 10 minutes? Okay. Let me move then to item 6. This is a new item, and hopefully it'll be a recurring one monthly, and it's a brief agenda item, shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. It is my intent to have a workshop mode for a very brief portion at the end of our meeting so that we can talk about best practices to improve our meetings and our processes so that they're as effective and efficient as possible. And I just thought we might today talk about how to make motions so that they are correctly stated for the record. Our deliberations are focused and so on. So staff, you want to proceed with that, please?
So, Chair, new members of the Commission, thank you for that introduction. I think it wraps up or summarizes the motion, and to be able to articulate motions for the record so that it's clear to the Commission and to staff and to the public what action the Commission is taking, and it's articulated in the record. There's a number of options when we're looking at motions that could potentially be made at a hearing. The first one is following staff's recommendation that's included in the staff report. And the one way to address that is, as we've heard earlier today, is to make a motion to move staff's recommendation as articulated in the staff report. So you could say that and make that motion because it's clear and you're articulating what the motion is as indicated in the staff report. Another approach is move staff's recommendation and indicate those items 1, 2, and 3 and state those. The only concern is that if you are going to indicate making those motions as recommended by staff, that you use the language that's prepared by staff so that it's very clear that you're making the specified in attachment A as far as the CEQA findings, exempt from CEQA, and then approve the project subject to conditions. So it's very clear in the record what that motion is, and then it's clear for all the commissioners what action that they're voting on. And so the other variation on that when you're making a motion has to deal with if there's changes to a condition of approval. And as we saw today where you want to add a condition or you want to modify a condition. So then that would be to move staff's recommendation and then to approve the project subject conditions as revised in the hearing today. And then that's clear to everybody what that is. And what we've seen as far as a procedural manual is before we make the motion is that we go through, okay, this is what the condition is going to say. So when you make the motion, you say as revised at the hearing today, it's clear what that condition is going to be for everybody to do. So that's one of the variations when we're making changes to the conditions.
So how best do we clear that? How best do we, is it the chair states it, or do you state it? Or?
Commissioner Beluche, through the chair, the ways that we have found effective is when there's a revision to the condition of approval. The best approach is to take a break and allow staff to draft that condition and then put it on the screen so then everybody sees that, or read it into the record so it's very clear. I think the best approach though is to take a moment, pause, let us draft that condition and then put it up so everybody can see it. So that's an approach. Sometimes the changes to the conditions are very minor to where it's adding a word or adding a phrase, and that's very clear what that condition is and you're specifying to do that. Sometimes what happens is staff will add a memo that is revising the conditions, And so when you're making a motion and you want to accept those changes in the memo, then that motion would be to, move staff's recommendation as indicated in the staff report or as referenced in the memo dated whatever. So it's very clear on the record what that motion is and what the changes are conditions. And so the motion, or the person making the motion can as well indicate what conditions are being revised. Subject conditions, recommended by staff with revisions to conditions X, Y, and Z as revised in today's hearings. So that's some ways that procedure we can go through, making sure it's clear to the record and to the decision makers what those changes to the conditions are. Okay.
Commissioner Coward, did you want to?
Yes, I strongly support the notion of actually taking a break and writing things down. This is why at the end of the last meeting, when there were a lot of suggestions made near the end, we never saw them in writing. It was not clear to me exactly what we were keeping in and not keeping in. And for the first time ever, we did not stop to take the time to do that. And so I really support that. When it's this relatively simple like it was today, I think we were all on the same page, but I don't think it was as clear to us. And so I think it's really best to err on the side of caution. And secondly, this is just very personal, but also when a meeting goes this long with no break, I think it makes it harder for us to think clearly. And so I would strongly recommend that we not go past 1 o'clock without taking a break, because it's just harder to be concise with language, and that sometimes is a good time. If we know something is coming up, then we can maybe work ourselves on writing out a motion or preparing something that we know will be coming up as per the discussion that's happening. So just personal, I'm not good after 2:30 with no lunch. So thank you.
All right, then.
So,
Thank you.
Chairman, if I can just wrap it up really quickly. So we talked about forwarding staff's recommendations is for approval. The other variations on making a motion is in the event that the Planning Commission decides not to move staff's recommendation as presented in the staff report. What's presented to the Planning Commission is, let's say, typically findings for approval. And if the Planning Commission decides that you can't make that finding, or you want to make a motion for denial, the information in the record at that time doesn't support that motion. And so the recommendation is that when you look at the staff report, it says refer back to staff for alternative motions. And so in those instances, you would make a motion to refer it back to staff to continue it to a date certain, and direct staff to come back with findings for denial. And then when you make those motions, it's very helpful to staff to articulate those findings that the commission can't make. So when the commission's saying, redirect it back to staff for the reasons that I can't make finding X, Y, and Z, so that way staff has some direction on what the Planning Commission is wanting to review for findings for denial. And so then you would do a state certain, because that addresses any notification purposes. So we continue to a date certain, and then you say bring back findings for denial, and then the commission during deliberation will articulate the reasons for making those findings for denial. And then we'd bring back findings that would support that or reflect that discussion, and then the commission would then, at the subsequent hearing, we'd have new findings that would be reflecting a findings for denial, and then you would be able to make that motion.
Okay, Commissioner Police.
Sorry. I have a question then. So that means then the applicant, for example, could not appeal the decision until after the next meeting when he reads why you dislike him so much or whatever. So does that present any kind of timing issue for the applicant?
Chair Newman, Commissioner Palucci, that does extend the time frame, but they can't appeal it until an action is taken. And so there isn't an action taken until we come back with those findings for denial. And then the appeal period would run, and then they, either party could appeal it at that time.
Okay.
Commissioner Seno.
So to clarify, we can say we deny staff's recommendation. Is it then pro forma that we ask you to go back for findings for denial?
So, Commissioner Cianaro through the chair. So the practice is that the information that's presented to the Planning Commission, as in today, represents findings that support the the motion. And so it's not that the commission is denying staff's recommendations. You're taking action on the project. And so you're making motions and making findings and placing conditions on the project. And so really the direction to staff is come back with findings for denial of the project. And then you would, during deliberation, articulate what those findings would reflect.
So the project would already be denied, and the app,
No, not until finding.
so the applicant would have to wait.
Right. Okay. Commissioner Senor again.
Has this been, have we done this before? Have we remanded you to,
Yes.
recently?
So Commissioner Steenhour through the chair, this is standard practice in taking projects forward. And so we have done this before.
Commissioner Keller?
This is not listed as one of the topics, but it is planning best practices. And I would just like to suggest that rather than giving someone a time certain, which may create problems like it did today because we couldn't anticipate how long the first discussion would happen, that it might be a better idea to change the order of the agenda if someone has a time issue or you want to get them in and out quickly, then just schedule them first and let them be finished rather than cut short what potentially or surprisingly may be a longer discussion that would make it very difficult to hold to the time certain. Because I appreciate that when we invite people to come before us, we want to respect their time. And it puts a lot of pressure on the chair and on the commission to respect that time unless we promise them to go first. So I'm just making that suggestion.
All right. I think by consensus, having agreed to postpone any other matters that were on our internal agenda, unless there's any public comment.
Well, you don't want to go till dinner? No?
What are you pointing to?
I'm sorry, I note that the commission had agreed to move 4 and 5 on the standard agenda to the next meeting. Did the commission want to go to Roman numeral 8, which is the commissioner's request for future agenda items, or do you want to skip that too?
I'm done. Thank you we'll postpone that as well. Anyways, we will be adjourned today. We are not meeting in August, and our next meeting will therefore be on September 18th. Happy summer to everybody, and thank you for your tolerance today. Thank you, Steph.